Welcome to the second episode of this series where we turn a perfume idea into an actual branded bottle. And in this video, I'm going to talk about accords. Before I get to my desk and get out my big box of accords, I want to explain what we are doing and why we're even doing it this way. This is personally how I approach building perfumes. And I feel like it's really easy for beginners because it's quite predictable in a way. There's less chance of things going wrong because we're not combining individual notes, and instead we're combining accords. Let's quickly go over what an accord is and how I understand it. So an accord is, in my mind, just two or more materials that are put together and balanced to your subjective taste. And I say subjective taste because what you feel is balanced will be different from what I feel like is balanced. There will be some kind of average balance that most people agree upon, but I just want to highlight that there is no ideal balance that you should follow. For example, I really don't like patchouli crude. Therefore, formulas or accords that require patchouli crude, I would put less. And in result, somebody else might feel like this is not balanced. But to me it is because I don't really like patchouli. And accords, they can be as minimal or as complex as you would like them to be. In this example here, minimal, you could just combine two notes like green and red mandarin in order to get a more richer smell of mandarin. Or you could also add bergamot in here. It doesn't matter, really. Accords, they are not like in music where you have specific things that you have to follow in order to get a specific outcome. For example, the C accord on guitar, if you're familiar with that. It always has the same exact notes that you have to play in order to get that sound. But in perfumery, not only the structure is less strict, there are also different ways you can achieve the same outcome. In music, you don't really have that. If you use different notes, you're going to have a different sound. In perfumery, you can achieve a similar or very similar resembling scent by using different materials. So yeah, you can have a minimal accord with just 2 notes, 3 notes, or you can have a complex note like I built a tobacco accord. It had over 6 notes, some in trace amounts, but they all contribute to the smell. And as you can see, the gradient, this is what the balance looks like. It should feel like both notes are equally strong to your taste. Let's say this red one is patchouli. It might be just this much, but the outcome or what it smells like is still balanced. It doesn't mean that you need to always include the same grams of the materials. So yeah, actually this should be a more accurate way to represent this. Let's say the tobacco cord, we have a little bit of one material, maybe slightly more of this, and maybe a ginormous amount of something else. What I'm trying to say is accords can be as minimal or as complex as you want them to be. You just balance to your taste. And there are different kinds of accords. You can have accords that are enriching a specific smell. For example, what I did with the sandalwood accord, I shared that in my previous videos, where I combined different notes of sandalwood. I had bagdanol, I had ebanol, I had javanol, even cedarwood in there. And together they create a richer sandalwood smell. That would be the enrichment category. These are my categorizations. This is not textbook knowledge. I have to repeat that because I don't want people to think that I talk some nonsense. This is how I understand it. There are accords that can be impressions. For example, you try to create an impression of the rain, impression of the apple or a cookie that you ate in your childhood. There can be fantasy accords, something that smells like a fairy. For example, amber is not a real smell. There's no amber smell in real nature. If we talk about the classical labdanum, benzoyl resinoid, and vanilla combination that we know as the amber accord, it is a fantasy accord. The amber stone probably smells just like a stone. I haven't smelled it, but I know that it doesn't smell like the ambers that we just mentioned. There can be realistic accords, something that tries to replicate an actual smell in nature. Let's say a rose, a hyper-realistic rose, or a hyper-realistic plant or some animal note. And there can also be functional accords, something that's meant to help the formula instead of define its nature and theme. You might have a functional accord that adds a sparkle to the top notes, or you might have a functional accord that helps to blend materials together. Maybe have a a combination of Isoy Super and Silvamber, Timber Silk, and some musks or benzyl salicylate, and that could be like some kind of functional accord. That's just a random example, but what I'm trying to say here, this is how I see accords. Now, why they're so important and why I'm talking about this is because for the last month or two, I've been really focused on finding new accords and experimenting with them, blending them, and building my collection of accords, which not only helped me understand how perfumery works a little better and how different scents are made, it also made me realize how fundamental accords can be to creating your own original perfumes, at least in the way I want to approach it. We're going to look at that in a minute, where I deconstruct a Russian Muguet EDP that I made for myself. But the way I see it is that a fine fragrance can be looked at as a combination of accords, not individual notes. Although in the end it is individual notes, but you can look at it as building blocks. Focusing on accords is also going to help you get a richer smell. So instead of using one single sandalwood molecule, we would use a sandalwood accord, which in result gives us a more complex and richer smell. Building accords can also help you with maturation. So if you want to use different sandalwood molecules in a formula, if you have already built an accord and balanced it, well, the balance is right, that's first. But two, the molecules are already maturing together, they're already integrating with each other, which will speed up the time of the maturation of the final product, but also will help you get a more accurate idea for what it might smell like in the end. Because it's not like you're just combining raw materials that have never seen each other together and now you're waiting. No, you have already combined them. They have already had the time to talk to each other, let's say, and integrate, and now you have a matured accord. It makes experimentation easier. You will see that in just a minute with the accords that I have. It can make assembly easier. It gives you more control. Instead of using a material that you bought online, you can create your own specific smells that you want to use in your perfumes. And you control the smell, every aspect of it. You control the sourcing. Finally, focusing on accords will help you explore your taste and understand what you like, what you don't like, and how different smells are made. I also want to quickly touch over this thing that when I started, I used to think that something like a rose accord or an apple accord, I should find the ideal version of it, some kind of universal apple accord or universal rose accord. But really, what I learned is that there are no such things, as I mentioned previously, which was weird to me because I come from the music background and I thought, well, in music I have specific notes for a specific chord. Shouldn't it be the same in perfumery? But no, in perfumery it turns out you have skeletons, you have impressions, you have ideas. For example, here is a rose skeleton that I made, which smells like rose, and in my opinion it smells better than the rose base I bought online. And look, it has phenylethyl alcohol, citronellol, geraniol, eugenol, and beta-ionone. But this is not some ideal rose. This is not even a realistic rose because a real rose can have over 300 different compounds. And that's okay with me because I'm not trying to recreate a realistic rose or realistic perfumes. I'm trying to create something that smells good. But somebody else who's watching this video might approach a rose skeleton differently. They may not want to include eugenol or geraniol. They may want to include a different kind of ionone, maybe delta ionone or alpha. And that's totally up to you. What this means is that when I look for accords online, I no longer look at them and think, if I don't have a specific material, I cannot recreate this. I try to recreate it with the materials that I have, and I try to adjust it to my taste, which is where the subjectivity and your personal signature as a perfumer will start to develop and come in. So yes, this is just one way to make a rose, for example. You could make a gothic rose, maybe adding frankincense. You can make some kind of a dry rose, a spicy rose by adding more spices. The point is there are many ways to make a rose. This gives you a lot more freedom when you find accords online on Instagram or base notes or YouTube because you can experiment and you don't have to obsess over acquiring the very specific materials that this accord is using. That is accords in a nutshell. I'm not gonna talk about balancing just yet. I want to share with you this Perfume Anatomy diagram that I made of a Russian Muguet EDP that I put together some weeks ago. Let's say we put a drop of this perfume on a paper strip and we look at it under the microscope. Well, first, if we smell it, we just smell the perfume, right? But what happens if we try to dissect it? Let's say we zoom in on this or open up the perfume. What would we see in this specific example? Not all perfumes, just this specific perfume that I made. If you looked at the individual components, you would see the Grosjean accord, you would see a Muguet accord, an amber accord, a sparkle accord, a Russian leather accord. You see ethanol, TEC, DPG, and IPM. These are solvents. Okay, why do you see this? You see this because I combined these different accords, these 5 different accords, with a solvent like ethanol in order to create this smell. What else can we see? We can see that the Grosjean accord is 55 parts, the Muguet is 20, amber is 11, sparkle is also 11, and the Russian leather is 1 part, which might seem like it's very little compared to the others, but when you smell the perfume you can really feel it because it is strong. The point of this video is not to explain what each accord does and how they are built, but to show you that this one single Russian Muguet EDP consists of 5 different accords in this example and some solvents. The TEC, DPG, and IPM I did not add. Those were already added in the materials that I bought, like benzoin resinoid for the amber, molybdenum, something like that. A very simple explanation of how this works together is that the Grosjean acts as a base. It is a very diffusive, long-lasting base. We use this as the foundation, the thing that gives our perfume performance and structure. Then I add a Muguet. This is top to heart notes kind of accord. It feels very flowery. It smells like Lily of the Valley, if I remember what the Muguet actually stands for. It is a lovely, refreshing, flowery smell. And we combine that with an amber and a Russian leather accord. The main idea is the Muguet plus Russian leather. But in order to make the Russian leather smell more pleasant, we also add amber. Otherwise, it might smell too harsh because there's not much sweetness in the Muguet or Russian leather accords. The amber helps to balance the Russian accord in this case. Finally, the sparkle accord, which we're gonna dive even deeper. This is like a champagne top note kind of accord, which makes the opening of this perfume sparkle and gives it a lively feeling when you first spray it. Otherwise it might be quite bland or flat at first. But this is not everything. Each of these accords consists of different specific notes, which we can dive deeper still. Let's say the sparkle accord. If we open it up, what do we see? This is the specific things I used in this accord. I used bergamot, linaloyl acetate, pink pepper, and C12 As you can see, the bergamot and linaloyl acetate gives it a citrusy opening. The pink pepper gives it a spicy grip, and the C12 also helps kind of with the same thing. They all work together to create a sparkle accord. When I put together this perfume, I didn't just throw random materials in my beaker. This is where combining accords, and this is why this approach that we're gonna do is so much easier, because you don't have to know the exact ratios of a sparkle accord or the exact ratios of a Grosjean accord. That's kind of what I wanted to show you here, and this is what we're gonna do, is we're going to combine different accords in a subjectively good ratio to create something that smells good. Before we get to the desk, let me show you, here is my accords library that I have built over the last month or two. I have different flowers like jasmine, rose, muguet, orange blossom, which can be looked at as a white floral. I have a tuberose, which I'm not too sure about, some Coca-Cola, pineapple, spice latte, a fougere, some others here that I found on Instagram. There's an Instagram account called PAX Formulas. He shares great accords like the mountain air. I think also the jasmine rouge came from there. And these are the accords that I'm going to be experimenting with in order to create a unique perfume. If you want to follow what I do, it would be best if you have a library of your own accords that you have made and that you like. If not, you can just copy the things that I do and follow along with the formula that I use. You don't have to follow by using your own accords. But if you can, I suggest you do, because you would have a better experience by using your own accords, not mine. Because what I like, you may not like.